material conflict of interest.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. 12.1. Conflict of interest as the president of the Harvey Bay Surf Lifesaving Club. The club will benefit from the fee being reduced. Place at the Harvey Bay and a perceived conflict of interest is I have a partner who works casually as a swim teacher.
Councillor Sam.
Raised to perceive 10.2.1, which is about the floorboards at City Hall. I don't think I need to, but I meetings. That's in relation to the floorboards, the City Halls and the CBD. My wife has a business in the. There's definitely no direct benefit to her business in relation to the item, and I'll stay in the room and vote on that matter. One, regarding the Aquatic Centre, I too, similar to Councillor Taylor, have go to school. They use curriculum, and I did purchase for my wife a 6-month pass a long time ago. I think it's expired. Of course, she has used the pool. Benefit to her or the children, and I intend to stay in the room and vote on that as well.
I intend to go swimming, but I never end up going.
Just could say the glare coming through, I can't see. Thanks, Keith. The far front door. Sorry, Councillor Truscott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also have to declare a proceeding as some of my children through their school attend. If I could please ask the gallery to refrain from comments. It is a matter of seriousness that we do have to acknowledge these potential perceived conflicts of interest, because otherwise there could be issues brought up where people accuse of this sort of nature. So if you could please refrain from laughing or making comments. Mr. Mayor, if you would like to also address that. But I intend to stay in the room and to vote on the matter because I do not believe it to be an actual conflict.
Thank you. There's no mayoral minutes. Confirmation of the minutes of the meetings. Ordinary meeting number 12 on the 6th of September, page 5 to 31. Moved by Councillor Hanson, seconded by Councillor Ch. Those in favour? Those against? Carried unanimous. Thanks. Special meeting on the 15th of September, pages 32 to 34. Moved by Councillor Everard, seconded by Councillor Seymour. Councillor Everard, you're right? Seymour? Councillors, everyone in favour? Those that are there? Unanimous? Public participation we had this morning. Thanks, Mr. CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We had 5 people participate in public participation this morning. The first person was Ms. Janine Dean, who wanted to lodge a petition expressing strong opposition to the sports precinct and strong support for de-amalgamation. She had 2 requests in relation to that petition. The Harvey Bay Sports Precinct, and the second request was the separation of Maryborough, Tyro and Wuku regions from Harvey Bay. In closing her speech, she also requested that the council consider moving public participation into the council meeting proper. The second participant in public participation wanted to talk on planning application 8 Dundas Street. he questioned the data levels. He wanted to express his concern in relating to the extension of his caravan park at Burham Heads. He felt that the infrastructure charges on caravan parks are inconsistent with the relaxation by the, and he requested charges be waived. Ms. Carolyn Packer, who wanted to express her concern in relation to Maryborough aquatic charges. She was concerned that non-swimmers have to pay a $2 charge at Fraser Coast facilities, and was also concerned that a carer or support workers have to pay a charge of $1.50. Swimmer, carer and support worker fees. Regional Council aquatic facilities. Mr. Graham Wode to thank the council for the. He provided an update on Granville Generator concern extinguisher concern in relation to the theft of solar lights. He also which national standardisation raised issues river floods. That's in relation to concerns of residents about in relation to toilet facilities. The second petition, Dugan and Wattle Street, requesting, raising the council's, bringing to the council's attention concern in relation to blatant disregard for wildlife welfare by members of the general public, and raising a number of concerns in relation to trail bike and four-wheel drive vehicle usage and people walking their dogs in that reason. The third petition, Mr. Mayor, is from Al Morrison, who has a petition of 1,000 signatures in relation to the residents' concern about intrusions, impacts of the Islamic prayer hall at 9 Tooth Street. And the next petition, Mr. Mayor, is from Ms. Janine Dean, which was presented in the public participation that was calling for the council to do two things. Firstly, to hold a referendum to put in abeyance the development of Harvey Bay Sports Precinct and stop all further development until the people have had their say. And secondly, requesting a referendum on the separation of Maryborough region, which includes Tyrone and Wicklow Shires, from Harvey Bay. And the final petition, Mr. Mayor, is from Mr. Harry Fox in relation to public risk issues in the general area of Conondale Court, Torquay, requesting that the council address those. Mr. Mayor, they're the petitions that have been tabled. It would be appropriate for someone to move that they be received and referred to the CEO for attention.
Moved by Councillor Everard.
Sorry, what was the one in parts of, so 1,000 signatures in relation to the impacts. Is that the summary of the actual?
I can read the petition if you want me to read the petition.
In particular, that one, yes.
We, the undersigned, respectfully request Fraser Coast Regional Council to address residents' concerns about intrusions and impacts that the Islamic prayer hall at 9 Tooth Street has incurred and seek its closure. The site was zoned as a place of worship in 1979 when it was semi-rural, but now it is a residential area. An updated impact assessment and no public consultation was undertaken when the property was recently purchased, resulting in it being not conducive with its current zoning. Finally, we request all places of worship within the Fraser Coast council jurisdiction be impact assessed and public consultation undertaken before approval is granted.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Everard, seconded. Councillor Madden. Councillor Everard? No. Councillor Madden, no. Those in favour? Against? Carried. Unanimous. Okay. Item number 9.1, the Fraser Coast Heritage Advisory Committee to 39. Moved by Councillor Seymour. Second by Councillor Lewis. Councillor Seymour.
Yeah, so this minutes reflect some of the recent work that the Heritage Advisory Committee's been doing. It's a very informed and active group, which I think can offer a lot more into the future for how the council deals with heritage matters. For example, Councillor Everard was just raised with me yesterday what we're doing with the Takura School, the school building. The committee, members of the committee have been out there. One of the committee members, Gavin Patterson, an architect, has put together a report on how we can preserve it. Unfortunately, there's no groups that want to use it, and council doesn't have an active use for it, so we have to look at ways of preserving it, perhaps as part of the landscape. A building that's not being actively used is much more threatened of being burnt down than any other one. So we have to look at ways of preserving it, because we know that the community appreciates seeing it there, seeing it in its context of there's not a lot of one-room schools left on the landscape that really demonstrate the development of the area. So we're looking at ways of, ideally, we'd love to get a community group using it, but other than that, ways of preserving. But the rest of the minutes cover the other aspects of work we've been doing, particularly in relation to railway heritage locally and other matters.
Moved by, sorry, where did I get that? Moved by Councillor Seymour, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Those in favour? Carried, unanimous. Sorry, didn't want you to... We're on speed dial. Yeah, that's right. Item 10.1.1, the Open Resolutions Register, pages 40 to 52. I got a mover for that. Councillor Hanson. Seconder. Councillor Madden. Councillors. Councillor Hanson. All right. Councillor Madden.
Presented at the October meeting. I note that it's in this agenda. So apart from that,
Okay. Yep. Those in favour? Those against? Carried, unanimous. The Organisational Performance Report, pages 53 to 87. Moved Councillor Madden. Seconded. Councillor Everard. Councillor Madden. Councillor Everard. All good. Councillor Truscott.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. One question regarding one of the works for Queensland project on page 61. It's got the skate bowl at Yalula there. I've been contacting with the Department of Community and Development about this to check, because the date that went out to the public that it would be hopefully completed was last Friday, the 22nd of September. I had sent a request prior to that to find out when there would be an update on that, because it looked as though it could still be some to that request yesterday stating that it was completed. It is still fully fenced, there's trucks, there's boxed off, there was guys working on the concrete, so I don't see it to be completed. I think complete to me is, yeah, I can understand some landscaping, but complete would be kids can get there on skateboards and scooters. So I don't know if someone can speak to that. If we can please put an update out to the public so that the young kids can know when it will be active again.
CEO.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We'll look into that. If it was taken to mean that it's reached practical, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's completed. That if that's the case, but we'll send an update. Actual completion and the facility.
And if we could just add that out, council website and social media.
Okay. Everard, those in favour? Carried unanimous. Point 2.1, the Maryborough City, pages 88 to 89. Councillor Truscott. Seconder. Councillor Truscott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think this is a good project initiative that we can work with the community in finding. I think there's great how council can work to work specifically with community groups. That, and then what products can be delivered as a result from that.
Anyone against it? Oh, sorry, the seconder. Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. It's going to back out what Councillor Truscott said. I think it's fantastic that we can look at working with community groups to get this timber out there. Maryborough is a timber, so I think it's wonderful that the community groups are going to get to use this second-hand goods.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour?
Yeah, I think the Harvey Bay Historical Society has really shown what can be done in this regard. Through Brian Taylor and others there, they've, you know, when the Governor General came here, we gave him a fountain pen made of wood from the Urangan Pier. So I'm hoping that Maryborough groups and groups across the Fraser Coast, whether it's men's sheds or others, will think of new and interesting ways to preserve this part of Maryborough's history.
Anyone else for or against? No, we'll go to the vote. Those in favour? Unanimous, carried. The item 10.2.2 was the community housing leases on page 383 to 385. Yeah, it's on. Sorry, it's that one? Yep. Councillor Everard? Anyone for? Right. Any against? We'll have the go to the vote. Those in favour? Catching us all out. You used to be accountant, didn't you? Oh, I'm fuzzy today. Item 10.3.1, the library overdue fines, pages 90 to 94. Moved by Councillor Seymour. Seconded Councillor Madden. Councillor Seymour.
Yeah, I spoke to librarians about this earlier in the year when I kept getting contacted by families who said they no longer visited the library because they couldn't afford to pay off their overdue. Looked into it a bit further, I started to realise that we were kind of one of the only councils still doing the fines. I think we're one of 14 in the whole state. Many councils are moving away from it. Bundaberg only just recently got rid of their overdue fines. Sydney City Council has. And it's found that it's actually more effective when you don't have fines, that people start bringing them back. And then when I looked a little bit further, the only reason we have fines is because of amalgamation. and the university. So Harvey fines when they had a joint, which was a very good facility. I got out a lot of the textbooks for the university, as I understand it, that there'd be overdue fines because people were checking out their books, and they wanted to make sure they were back in time, and that was the strategy in terms of their students. We no longer have a joint library with the University of Southern. Now has their library on the other side of the room. Make it all the same. We brought in the fines in Maryborough. So now that is no longer relevant, and given the whole country in terms of libraries recognizing that overdue fines are punitive and they keep families away and actually are not the most effective way in terms of making resources returned. I agree with this recommendation that we no longer issue overdue fines.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of interest, listening to the radio, and they were putting out that we've got no more fines, please bring back your books, and they are thinking that they may be out of date. That reinforces basically what we're saying here, but maybe we can put it out there that anyone who's had a library, please dig through your library books, your own collection, and find out what belongs to I think it's one of the key elements of being a councillor and also council to listen carefully to these communities, to understand what they'd like to see happen, and to work in consultation with them, because if you work collaboratively, you get the best outcome, and it needs to be a majority decision. I have to say we have to be very careful that the consultation is the majority. This situation has arisen as a consequence of some rather unusual circumstances, and council has brought in a consultant, had the report done. I really believe that it's imperative that the Bopple community be given an opportunity to see and debate, consult with council around what actions council might take in the future around this report. And I think those consultations need to inform councils only good manners to allow them that opportunity, and that is the reason for moving this resolution.
Thank you.
Can I ask a
Councillor
question?
Taylor.
I appreciate no information. I do note that we actually paid somebody to go out and do consultation. It's referred to on page 122 of the report, where it talks about, well, it wasn't an in. There was consultation done with the Bopple Progress Association, Bopple Rec Grounds, the Men's Shed, the Bopple Museum, the Scouts. It identifies the concerns in there. I guess my question relates to what further beyond that scope consultation will be conducted in relation to this matter that will potentially provide a different outcome or a different solution.
CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding is the further consultation will be in relation to the findings of the report. I don't believe that the report has been made available to the wider Bopple community, and that they have, and that the council. I don't believe the council has sought their opinions and feedback in relation to the recommendations. So the consultation will be, I would imagine, explaining the outcomes of the consultation, the consultant's report, and seeking feedback from the community.
Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in effect, it will be broader consultation with the broader community, and I was just wondering what sort of timeline would be on that, or is there a timeline?
CEO.
Thank you. When you say broader consultation, I was referring to consultation with the community directly affected, and that'd be the Bopple community. and the timeline, this has been an issue that's been dragging on for quite some time, so I'd be keen to try and make it some priority, but I couldn't give you a definitive time frame until I liaise with the director and her staff in terms of the available resources.
So on that note, because I think that's important, it's more specific consultation to a specific audience. The specific consultation relates to the outcome, so we're not going back to the beginning and having a broad, it's very, we're going to articulate a position that's already been established to determine whether or not the Boppel community in particular will come on that journey with the council, I guess, or will go on the journey with the community, whichever way you state it.
So, yeah.
Generally speaking, yes.
Specifically, generally speaking.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Madden, seconded by Councillor Truscott. Those in favour? Carried, unanimous. Exhibition of draft land to 208. Move. Second, Councillor Lewis. Councillor Everard. All right. Councillor Lewis. Well, you don't have to.
Yes. Look, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, these are draft plans going. A bit of work gone into it. They're important sites. It's important that we do develop these land management plans, but the input of the public is very desirable, and yeah, not much more to say on it beyond that, other than to thank the officers for their work in this field.
Okay. Those in favour? Carried, unanimous. Item 10.3.4, Queensland Drone Strategy Consultation Paper, pages 209 to 236. Councillor Truscott. Moved by Councillor Truscott, seconded by Councillor Chapman. Councillor Truscott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think drones play an important part of technology and innovation. They advance. I think they have huge potential for the wide variety of just about any way they can interact with things on, above or below the ground. So certainly support this motion, and I'm pleased that we've already got meetings for tomorrow to start trying to plan how we can progress with drones and to discuss this matter further, and happy to support putting in a submission.
I think the drones for this.
It may be supports drones. It doesn't actually articulate in the officer's recommendation whether we are providing a positive or a negative response to the submission. So it says submit a response to Queensland Drone Strategy consultation paper. Would it be in favour of? I guess for the purpose of looking back in history, we'd like to actually state whether or not we support the actual position.
Yes, CEO.
I'm sometimes called a brave man, but I'm not brave enough to write a response say we don't support it. I think it's very clear what the council's position is in relation to drones, and that it very favourably supports Coast region. I don't necessarily.
Well, I'd just say that people reading the recommendation by itself, because we have provided responses not supporting things in the past, and it states in there. So I'll just say submit a favourable response. or a positive response, or a, yep.
That's up to the move.
I was just going to say, because that's already been moved, I'm happy to accept that. Yep.
So positive or favourable?
Favourable.
I could. Councillor Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say I support this. I think it's a great thing as well. I think drones have a very big future in a lot of things, but also in agriculture as well. I think that you can take a lot of man hours out of agriculture, and certainly within council pest management as well. It's got a big future there.
Yeah, I'd also in support of this. It's an industry that's here to stay. It's here for a long time, and will only be continually developed. I go back to probably when cars were invented. This is similar. It's going to have a very bright future, and I think we need to hop on board. And we've got all the facilities here. We've got the ocean, space involved. Best in regard. Moved by Councillor Truscott. In favour. Well done. 10.3.5, the application for development permit at Dundas Street, Granville, page 237 to 305. Right. Got a move it, Councillor. Sorry, question. Councillor Taylor.
Has there been a mover yet?
No, questions.
There needs to be a mover in a second before the motion's actually.
No, it's a question.
We can ask questions before the. So we're not.
Your call.
Yeah, go on. Question.
Public participation matter. While there's in the report that would dissuade me from supporting the officer's recommendation, and I believe that the determinations of the officers are accurate and in compliance with the planning scheme. Did one of the officers want to provide any response in relation to the submission, in relation to the flow and the velocity of the river prior to council progressing this matter?
Tony.
Through Mr Mayor. Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I've asked Council Senior Development Engineer to specifically address those handed out this morning. I think one of the key considerations here is regarding velocity, but as I'm not an engineer, I'll hand over to an expert who may be able to address those questions for you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Yeah, that's
Yeah, it should be on.
no, that's it.
No, we need it to go through.
Yeah, needs to be recorded.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I've looked at the submission that Mr Wayne, he's provided me with information that's listed on the Bureau of Meteorology site that shows the heights and flood gauge levels that occurred along the river at different locations like Gympie and Maryborough Tyro. And he's worked out what he thinks is the velocity of flow of the river from this information. First of all, the information that is provided shows the peak, is my understanding, the peak flood levels that occurred at certain townships in certain years. So to understand the velocity of the river, you need to take a snapshot in time, not apply the 1870 level in Gympie against the 1875 level in Maryborough. So he's applied the differences in those gauge levels over the distance of the river and worked out that it falls so much in height, but those flood levels are not taken at the same point in time, they're a peak. So it's unreliable to say that his calculation of velocity of the river is correct. Council engaged separate consultants to do an assessment of the Mary River flooding over the Maryborough Township. It was based on our understanding of AHD, which is Australian High Datum. We held that datum across the modelled area, and we established, based on the available flood width of the river, what the velocity of flow would be at certain locations. We established that the velocity of flow at this particular location was in the order of 3 to 4 metres per second. I'm not sure if you've thrown a piece of wood in a river and watched it flow, but it's travelling 3 metres every time you count like that, which is not a slow flow. We looked at the depth of that flow and the impact upon the dwelling itself. We even engaged a hydraulic consultant who was involved in the Queensland Flood Inquiry to look specifically at this concern. We took that on our assessment, and the velocity of flow is a critical issue when it comes to making a decision on this proposal. I think there was discussion about another location, and we looked at that information per second, less on average, and in making that decision we were comfortable with the risk as opposed to this one.
Just on a query, when you look at the averages of a river flow as well, is it the case where a river bends that the flow would either increase or decrease depending on the curvature of the river? Is it?
Yes, we do. If you look at a cross-section of a conduit in the deepest part of the than the edge, in the case of this property, the water cuts diagonally across the bend of the river. They are very close to the edge of what is a fast-flowing section. Naturally, it dissipates as it gets close to the section, and we're concerned about a dwelling being in this constrained area.
Councillor Madden?
Yes, one of the questions that I would ask you would be the boats and the tree trunks and the stuff that comes down the river, if that was to impact on the structure itself, has that been modelled or not modelled?
It hasn't been modelled in our system.
Yep.
There was an engineering opinion provided with application that it could be structurally designed. We also had our own consultant have an opinion. It comes down to a level of risk. You've got potentially a large log can be washed down at 4 potential damage, can rock foundations, to withstand that. But as far as council taking that risk, it should be refused.
Move, Councillor.
Yes.
Move, Councillor Taylor. Madden. Thanks, John. Sorry. Councillor Sanderson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Through you, Mr Chair, to the CEO, when we discussed this, if we're, of course, refusing this in the future, so people seeking consultant and drawing change in our zoning from constrained to not allowing people in that area in the future.
CEO?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll take that one on notice and come back to council.
Councillor Truscott?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. One of the questions like this were to be approved, worst case scenario, a house was built and demolished in a situation of a flood, what risk or responsibility would there be to council in that situation, having allowed it to have been built in a known situation where it could flood and potentially destroy a house?
Tony? Sorry.
Through the CEO. Just to address councils completely prohibit types of development, but what council has done is provide restricted limitations on the type of development here and imposed a range of other constraints through its overlay flood-prone area, and that's obvious in terms of a or any person proposing to enter into a development opportunity. However, there are, as was noted by Council's Senior Development Engineer, engineered solutions, and we often see efforts with engineered solutions, and there always is an opportunity to consider those in performance-based planning assessment. I think we could, draw an extreme example from New Orleans. There are engineered solutions to the sorts of events that are risks in building a city in a location like that, but it's still about how much risk council wants to consider and where is the liability. I think that we can also consider the risk in terms of any future significant events, and it's not hard to look back just a few years and look at the significance of events that have occurred, for example, in Ipswich and other areas of Brisbane, and the potential council decisions where there is a risk tolerance that may be beyond what is applied in other locations. And there was an inquiry into that matter, and there are questions about controls. Now, the controls that apply in areas such around Brisbane River have been tightened, and we certainly would encourage council to support this recommendation on that basis, but we will assess applications on their merits in terms of engineering modelling and engineering standards. What I can also say is that modelling is always improving, and we have a number of areas of the city where we are seeing development proposals in areas where our modelling is now more advanced, and we're seeing a higher level of risk, and we're requiring developers to address that higher level of risk, which is challenging, but I think it's a responsibility that council has. I can ask the Senior Development Engineer to add to those comments if council would like further information on that, but certainly decisions should be based on the best information available at the time, and it's a consideration for council in terms of the level of risk that it wishes to tolerate.
Just to carry on from that, I guess more specifically my question would be, could council be held liable in any way if it were to be approved and an accident occur?
Tony?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'm not a lawyer, and as I said, it's an assessment process. In these matters in the courts in recent years, there have been an assessment of the extent of knowledge and that decision makers have had, and the capacity to mitigate what may be considered as known risks.
No. Not here. Sorry. Sorry about that. Sorry, I'll just make a point there. For the cameras, we'd prefer that the camera people stay within their set areas. Okay, thanks, mate. Sorry, Tony. Finish?
Mr Mayor, just if I can, in seconding this motion to not approve this application, we had the experience in Bundaberg. Now, when I was the valuer, Bundaberg actually took a decision to have an adopted flood height, which was higher than anything on their records in the past. I did a lot of valuations of properties in North Bundaberg that got flooded because their adopted flood height was still below what happened in 2013. So one of the things that concerns me is while we're working on a set of flood heights, there's no guarantee that that's going to be the highest recorded flood, because the same things happened down in Gympie a few years ago. They had 1893 flood height, which is what we were all working on, and in that year it went under, so it's not that level now, it's a metre higher. So those things, I think, are things that concern me. The other thing that concerns me is in one of these floods, and I can't remember which one of it, but Maryborough has an ID that we have plenty of warning. We've always got plenty of warning. We know when the flood's coming. Well, we had one experience in the last few years where people in Granville went to bed at night and woke up the next morning and couldn't get across the river. So it can come up, and it can come up very quickly depending on where the water is, where the rain's coming down, the volume of the rain, the location of it, a whole series of things. So my concern is that if we were to approve this, we could be putting at risk the lives of the proponent and any future owner of that property, and I don't think I'm prepared to take that risk.
Okay, Councillor Taylor to move.
I support...
Sorry, Stuart, I jumped you.
No, that's all right. I support the officer's recommendation to refuse this application. I appreciate the lengths to which they have gone to try to assess this. It's quite clear, in consideration from the assessment and also from our council staff, that there are significant issues that cannot be overcome, and I think it's important that area will flood, and one of the assessments is whether or not a safe evacuation point can be provided. This is not the case. It cannot be provided, and it's a requirement in the assessment to ensure that a safe evacuation point can be provided. It cannot in this circumstance. The river flow is a significant issue. The report refers to the flood hazard overlay, and in particular, as was referred to by other councillors, the debris loading, and I think that's a serious consideration. And also, as Councillor Madden indicated, the report refers to the area flooding without warning. If you consider one of these in isolation, it would be enough to refuse. If you consider them all, it would be irresponsible to do anything but refuse, and I support the officer's recommendation.
Anyone against the officer's recommendation? No. Any other speakers for? No. We go to the vote. Those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. Item 10.3.6 is pages 306 to 325. It's on an application to develop the 6872 Emerald Parkway, Urangan. I have a mover. Yes, Mr Mayor.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to move this motion, thank you.
Move Councillor Chapman, seconder. Councillor Madden.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to foreshadow an alternative motion, which is that we defer the report to enable officers to undertake further discussions with the applicant regarding vegetation and lot configuration, with particular consideration to providing open space over lots 21, 22 and 23, and with a further report to come back to a future council meeting.
Mr. Mayor, we have a problem here, is that we have the motion now before us, and if that motion is not withdrawn, we'll have to actually vote against that to vote for a deferment, which effectively means we'll be voting against the officer's recommendation. So whether or not...
no, don't get... Sorry.
So we before, effectively what should have happened would be that the councillor would put his motion forward to make that the motion. As it stands, we now have the current officer's recommendation that has been put forward as a motion, moved and seconded, and we have another councillor indicating an alternate motion.
Foreshadowed motion.
So
The motion is a foreshadowed. The foreshadowed motion means that if the motion that's been moved and seconded fails, then we move to the foreshadowed motion, which will require a move and seconder, and we'll go through that process. There is also alternatives. Councillors can move alternative motions and amendments to the motion as well.
you're saying that Councillor Lewis's motion will be voted on first?
No, the motion that's on the table needs to be considered first. If that loses, then we move to the foreshadowed motion of Councillor Lewis, and Councillor Lewis speaks to his foreshadowed motion.
But aren't we, by voting against this, actually voting against the development application?
So the motion that's put forward is the officer's motion. So the motion on the table is the officer's motion, as I understand it.
I think he's saying that if that gets lost, there's nothing to be deferred.
There's no report, there's no motion.
Someone can foreshadow a motion after, if this motion fails, we move to the foreshadowed motion. Before that's considered, someone can foreshadow a motion on that, if that fails.
Okay, but just walk it through. If Councillor Chapman's motion fails,
Yes.
what's the point of Councillor Lewis's motion?
What's being deferred?
What is being deferred? Well, his motion has been put.
But
you have to ask Councillor Lewis what's the purpose.
At that stage, the application's been dealt with.
Yeah, it's been dealt with.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, may I suggest, with the agreement of the mover, to withdraw the motion.
What I'm understanding is that then the application is being considered and there is no deferral.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And
So,
so my suggestion, and it would need the agreement of the mover, is that we would to proceed.
Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I agree to withdraw it with regret. I just look at, you have a look around this site of the Fairhaven site, one side, residential development the other side. Nearly every afternoon I'm trying to save here were bulldozed probably 8 times that out at the sports precinct, and there was nothing said about it. So what I'm saying, we've got out, say $300,000 a lot, $15 million, sorry, of development into our economy. So I'll withdraw it, but I'd like it to the officers to come back fairly soon with a reply to this. Thank you.
Go.
So, because there wasn't a mover and a seconder on Councillor Lewis's motion at the moment, so it's up to a councillor to move a motion.
Well, I'm moving the motion that I just outlined before, which I'm happy to repeat if that helps, if you haven't got it up.
Do you have that motion?
Just say it again, Dave.
It would be handy, councillors, if you're looking at foreshadowing motions, alternative motions, that you provide them to the committee clerk in advance. If you could repeat, if you could state your motion slowly so that we could capture it precisely, please.
Yes, thanks, Mr. CEO, and my apologies for not having having it in writing earlier. The motion is that Council defer the report to enable officers to undertake further discussions. Officers to undertake further discussions with the applicant regarding vegetation and lot configuration, and in particular the dedication of lots 21, 22 and 23 on the proposal plan to open space, comma, with a further report to a future council meeting.
Need a seconder? Yep. Treat it like the ordinary motion. Speak
That's it?
Do you want to say second?
Seconder,
Mover speaks to it. No, mover.
sorry, the mover speaks. Sorry. Councillor, have you spoken or?
Yes, but I haven't. Yes, concerns about this this particular subdivision, and while I don't want to make the life of the developer difficult, and I appreciate that that margins can be tight, but nonetheless there is a concern that this particular proposal contemplates the total destruction of the vegetation on that site. This is part of a precinct which was very well vegetated 10 or 15 years ago, and which has been progressively developed in a way which, can I put it this way, which hasn't done really anything for preservation of parts of the natural environment, or indeed has done very little. Now, in part, there's a problem with this because of the fact that, in my submission, the earlier subdivisions weren't dealt with as sympathetically as they might have been from an environmental point of view. But nonetheless, I think it's still possible to pull something out of the fire with this subdivision and give us a better result in the end. If you have a look at the site, and indeed on the plan, you'll see that just to the east of it in Crystal Court, there's an open space provision, which is, I'm estimating, but I would say about 30 or 40 metres wide, so that between the last of the houses in Crystal Court and what is, I understand, a boundary between further lots to the south going to Boundary Road, there's a vegetated band well to the east, and the concrete footpath, which is used to enable pedestrian traffic to schools and so on, is between the end of the housing and that vegetated strip. Now, what this proposal suggests is that while the concrete path will continue to the north of the vegetated strip, between the strip and the housing, until we get to this subdivision, it's then going to divert down to the end of that property boundary and proceed along there. So while it's been we've been successful in creating a small amount of vegetation in Crystal Court and in the streets to the east, for reasons that I don't understand, we've stopped doing that here. If there's a proposal to take that future road through as a linkage to subdivisions to the south, then it may not make sense to have a vegetated strip, then a road, and then another vegetated strip. That vegetated section couldn't proceed over the eastern side of the new road, which would involve taking all of lots 22 and 23 and part of lot 21 at least, then run the path down to the end of the street and then across there and so on. There are plenty of options to consider, but there are some significant trees, and I think it'd be well worth preserving, albeit that it's not much of an outcome. I think we do need to give more attention to how we can create better environmental outcomes in our subdivisions. We get praised by visitors regularly for how beautiful, what a lovely job we've done with our foreshore, with our suburban term ends in this standard of subdivisions generally. So that's one of my problems. The other problem is that the 500 square metre limit, 14 of them, I think, out of the 50 in this subdivision. I think that ought to be looked at again. I don't think that the grounds for a small subdivision, I don't see that this is the sort of precinct which is within walking distance of activity centres and public transport, etc., which lends itself to that 380 lot subdivision. I'd like that looked at, but in summary, I think we can do better with a little bit of tinkering. I don't want to hold the developer up. I don't want to make his subdivision totally uneconomic, but I think there's the opportunity for just a little bit of tree preservation there. And incidentally, I know that there was, as I understand it, an earlier subdivision approved on this site, which provided for about 4,500 square metres of vegetation at the end. What I'm proposing is about 1,500. In effect, if you look at that aerial shot, essentially what I propose, or what I'd like, is to take that green strip right across. Now, if there's a reason why a road has to continue straight through, then even if we take it halfway across, that would be, I think, an advantage. I'm simply asking that we defer the matter to enable officers to pursue these with the applicant.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. That just exceeded your 5 minutes. Councillor Seymour?
Yeah, I would like to speak in favour of the motion. I'm not very happy with this proposed development, and I think it's worth bearing in mind the actual decision we're being called upon, the decision that we're responsible for making. It's a material change, a reconfiguration of lot, reconfiguring a lot from 1 into 50. So this person, the applicant, has bought 1 lot, and they're seeking council's approval to turn it into 50 lots. That's the decision we're called upon to make, and we do that by reference to the planning scheme adequately reflects the agreed upon, democratically agreed upon. I voted against it, but it's the document we have to assess applications, and I don't believe the proposal at the moment meets the low standard of our development. There is no, as you'll see, it's a pretty simple subdivision. It's gone now. There is no allocation of public space except for a 5-metre concrete path. The average lot size is 517 square metres. Many are, obviously that being an average, many are well below that, including 2 that are 380 square metres. Our planning scheme is meant, particularly for low density, is meant to be about community amenity and livability. So for example, P08 under the low density scheme is about subtropical climate. Perhaps I could ask this as a question now. So P08, Performance Outcome 8, development is located, designed and operated to be responsive to the Fraser Coast's subtropical climate and minimizes the consumption of energy and water. So as you'll see on the design there, that they have not left a single tree. These houses facing more or less east-west. I think if this went ahead, you go back and you'd see air conditioner units in most of them. They are clearing the entire site. If you go there, you'll see it's a heavily vegetated site. Every single tree, shrub, and blade of grass on a very heavily vegetated site that is full of wildlife, gliders, possums, birds and baby birds and nests right now, in fact. So the application is to clear every single tree and bush and blade of grass off of this, and then to put lot sizes where you cannot possibly plant another significant tree. So, you know, you talk about heat islands, you talk about poor development, frankly. You talk about poor designs that people in the future will look back and say, how did this get approved? They'll be looking at us. We set the precedents here, and this is not a precedent I want us to be setting. It's hard to know what conditions we put on this because we haven't really. It's just where they're cutting it up, putting a road straight through it, taking all the trees, and no public space. PO9, Performance Outcome 9 of the Low Density Code, which again is the agreed upon document that this is supposed to be applying, says development mitigates adverse impacts on areas of environmental significance, including creeks, gullies, waterways, wetlands, coastal areas, habitats, and vegetation through location, design, operation and management. Again, every single tree and bush is being taken out. I presume they'll do it through 2 dozers and a chain in between. I fully support Councillor Lewis's motion. This one needs a lot more consideration if we are going to adequately, or just a refusal, if we are going to adequately carry out our proper roles today.
Any councillor against? Councillor Madden?
While I take on board exactly what Councillor Lewis and Councillor Seymour are saying about trees, I guess I come from a slightly different perspective in that people who want to do things within our community, develop houses, subdivisions or whatever else, need to have a degree of surety before they can go out and do their development. So we have a town plan. Whether you like what's in the town plan or not is a moot point, and if we don't, we need to look at changing it. But the developers need to know that when they address issues in the town plan, and they usually get town planners to assist them with that, that there's a degree of surety that council's just not going to change their mind partway through the process, because that gives really bad signals out there into the business community. No, we can't be sure. So it's one of the things, and I have to say, when in referring to a lot of the legislation in State Parliament, it was around surety of being sure, whether you like the outcome or not, being sure that the process can be followed. So I have some concerns, because I think the officers really did explain some of these things, and they've done their job to the best of their ability. I think if we were to say no to this development, we may well expose ourselves to some kind of legal risk, in that the developer may decide to challenge it because he will have had town planning, his own personal town planning advice to support. So on that, as I said, I fully acknowledge the issue around the trees, but I have concerns about surety for people coming into developments within any sort of development, not just a subdivision in our community, that our town plan, they can rely on it. If we don't like it, we need to change it.
Thank you. Is there another councillor for? You've got 5 minutes. Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If the original officer's recommendation was put to me today, I would be voting for it. While I may not necessarily agree with the entirety of the development, I believe that it has been conditioned to a level that complies and is consistent with that area. Having said that, I appreciate that there is often times where we need to take a step back and reconsider matters, and I believe that such an outcome as Councillor Lewis has provided is one that we should take time to consider. There's no rush to rush into this decision, and that's why I believe that on the basis of the request made by Councillor Lewis, I would support it. I'm not one to turn my mind to whether or not something potentially could be a legal risk, or whether we could potentially lose it at a higher court. I think as councillors we make decisions based on the information that's before us, on what we believe is best for the community, not whether or not we believe that it could be appealed, or it could be go up to a higher court to be assessed. I think it's a difficult way to make decisions based on what you have in front of you. If the motion was the original motion, I would support it, but very comfortable to take stock and to take time to consider if there can be some important vegetation that's kept into the future, then that's a good outcome, so I support it.
Okay. Another councillor against? Councillor Chapman?
Yes, Mr Mayor. I think, and here we are, we're trying to grow our economy and give, we've got a positive plan. Our officers have looked at and there's this the future developed also over as the future development on the southern side of this, is there's very little trees in that whole area. So this trying to say, I know that Councillor Lewis, there was another development on Boundary Road. You spoke against that there was not enough trees on that development when it was approved earlier. And that's just up the road from this one. But if you have a look at this, where that first stage of this site was, that whole area was just cleared. And I think that taking it back to the officers, letting the officers have a look at it, see what their thoughts are out of it, and bring it back to us as soon as possible, just so we can keep the developers with some confidence. Thank you.
Any councillor for? Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. And whilst I don't like to stifle development, and I certainly listen to both sides of the argument, we're actually not refusing this development. All we're simply doing is asking to go back and have another look, and hopefully a compromise can be achieved. I have some concerns about the small lot size there as well, but yeah, and the officers can go back to the developer, and hopefully an acceptable outcome can come about. So I have no issue supporting.
Councillor Lewis, you can have your right of reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I won't speak at great length, but just a couple of points. Firstly, I understand from Councillor Chapman's comments, even though he spoke against the motion, that he's comfortable to have it deferred, and I appreciate that. I understand that we'll day as it happens, and I would anticipate that we'd have an answer and could deal with the matter then. Just a couple of very quick comments. I think in terms of performance outcomes, they're subjective decisions as to whether a particular proposal meets the performance outcome, which will overcome the report says on page 310 of our agenda with the following acceptable outcomes of the. We then look at performance outcomes to see whether that's in effect going to overcome the non-compliance. And in my submission, that's a subjective issue, and we are entitled to look at it and say, well, what's the best way around here? The other substantive matter that I wanted to mention and failed to mention earlier is that the proposed conditions relate to or provide for landscaping and streetscaping. Now, I had a drive around there both yesterday and today. In the adjoining street, Crystal Court, leaving aside the 30 or 40 metres at the end of it where they have left vegetation, there are two trees on the footpath in a street that has 33 houses. In the next street to the east is Zircon, and that goes around, I think, Moonstone Drive or something. There'd be another, maybe 60 or 70 houses there, and in those streets there are 5 trees on the footpath. Now that tells me if in an area of something like 80 plus houses we've managed to have 7 trees on the footpath, landscaping's not working. And if landscaping isn't working, perhaps this is another way of providing just a tiny oasis of greenery where the odd bird can find a home to nest, the odd possum can forage, and people might even walk their dogs on a leash through there and enjoy the greenery. Not to mention making it a far more attractive walk for those who are going to walk down the 2-metre concrete footpath in the 5-metre area, which incidentally will provide a buffer of a kind between the housing and the vegetated strip. So thank you. I appreciate the support for those who are happy to defer this for 3 weeks so we can have another look at it.
Do I get right to reply to a seconder?
No.
Okay, we'll go to the vote. Those in favour, moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Seymour. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 7, 3. Thank you. .3.7 is page 325 to 330. is the expansion of the pond of reflection in the Maryborough Cemetery. I have a mover for that. Mover, Councillor Truscott. Seconder, Councillor Madden. Councillor Truscott.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Not really much to say on this. I think the trial, they've advised that it's been popular and therefore to recommend this expansion. I think, yeah, it's one of those sort of odd jobs that council has of looking after what happens when our bodies are no longer here. So I've had other interests previously raised to me even about looking at other items such as burials in not necessarily a coffin but similar to a cardboard box and having a tree planted on you. And so there are many ways in which one can go now. So, but happy to support this motion for the expansion of the pond of reflection.
Councillor Madden.
Yes, I'm happy to support this motion. I do note in the report that an overall cemetery master plan is being developed, and I look forward to seeing what that master plan looks like, but certainly this is appropriate to include within that master plan. Happy to support it.
Thank you. Go to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Carried. Unanimous. 10.3.8, a bit of a supplementary on page 386. The Regional Arts Development Fund recommendations. I have a mover for that. Sorry. Councillor Lewis. We have a seconder. Councillor Everard. Councillor Lewis.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I won't speak at any length on this. The application fulfils the guidelines for the Regional Art Development Funding Agreement. It's part of what we're able to do with that fund, which, as councillors will know, is 50% funded by state government and 50% funded by council. So I just recommend that we pass or approve the application in accordance with the officer's recommendation.
Yeah, Councillor Everard. Those in favour, we'll go to the vote. Those in favour, those against, carried. Unanimous. That's 10. And 10.3.9. Yeah, I got one. Right, the Local Government Grants and Subsidies Program. Sorry, who's moving that? Councillor Everard.
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Taylor. Councillor Everard.
Happy to any opportunity to partner with higher levels of government to fund projects across the region. We welcome their input.
You bet. Councillor Taylor. No. Anything against? No. Go to the vote. Those in favour? Carried. Unanimous. So it's back to... That's them. 10.4.1, page 331 to 339, Council Policy Review for the Aquatic Plant Management Policy. It's exciting. Councillor Seymour, move that. A second. Councillor Everard. Councillor Seymour.
Yeah, this is a pretty simple change, changing words like control to management, and this doesn't change the actual meaning or the intent of the policy, but reflects newer legislation and terms.
Thank you. Councillor Everard, those in favour? Carried. Unanimous. Item 11.1, on page 340. An item, request to install secured and lockable mail trays for councillors. I move for that. Councillor Taylor. For a seconder. Councillor Truscott. Councillor Taylor.
I'm happy to speak, and I just want to ask the CEO a question without notice. Effectively, it's two questions. The first one is, have there been any incidents that you are aware of that raises concern in your mind as to the security of council documents in mail trays, in council mail trays? And the second one is similar. Have you got any feedback to councillors in relation to public access to council chambers and the need for better security of those same trays? The two questions without much notice.
CEO.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I am aware of two instances where councillors' mail trays have been accessed without permission from that specific councillor, and I'm also concerned that the councillors' lounge area where the mail trays are located are accessible to members of the public, particularly the members of the public that need to use the toilets that come into our cashiering section or inquiry section, and they need to use the toilets they're let in. So from that perspective, that area is not secure.
Thank you.
I'm happy to speak on the matter now. Clear that we have an obligation to protect documents that come into our custody. The chain of that protection has integrity up to the point that it's delivered into our tray by an officer. Confidentiality. They remain unsecured for a period of time until a councillor collects both the Hervey Bay and Maryborough areas. There are area. Solution is to provide that or keep that consistent chain of security and to ensure the protection of that confidentiality. To give it the correspondence from they didn't want other councillors to know about it. They didn't want other community members to know about it. They wanted to share their point of view in relation to their current situation in financial dire straits. Now, that person has the right of privacy and I have to be able to answer with confidence that the information is confidential. A staff member who a small window that can easily be protected and at little cost to our community, and I think it's vitally important that we can act and honestly say that those documents will be secure. And so that is why this motion is put up. Take long.
Yep. Councillor.
Aware that this has been a long-standing issue as well, and for the reasons that Councillor Taylor has raised, I think it is vitally important. I am aware of at least two instances that I know of my mail tray where there was unlawful access to the tray, which is under investigation, and I'm aware of another tray where confidential information disappeared and the matter was referred to the police. So I think it is of a serious nature, and I do think it needs to be addressed and to be acted on promptly.
Is this motion? Well,
I just want to go back to another item, but not in relation to that.
sorry. Okay. Councillor Taylor? That's it? No. Is against, carried, unanimous. Because on a number of occasions when I go past some councillors' cubby holes, the pigeonholes where the stuff is on the floor. You know, so I was just wondering how big it is going to be. A lot of information.
The dimensions that have been specified for that project, but I can find that information out and circulate it to the council.
Thank you. Okay, item 11.2, naming of the new mover, Councillor Taylor. Seconder, Councillor Everard. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is something that I really believe is people that have paved the way, and the Messer family is one of those. While the motion doesn't actually seek to name the actual boardwalk, it seeks to work with the Messer family in naming that new section. So they obviously have a view on a name, and I think it's important to work with them. In particular, it's important to recognise really unique parts of any community, and I think the Watermelon Man is a really, I think everyone who's been around the Harvey Bay, particularly Esplanade area, would have a story about the Watermelon Man. Some people debate whether he's the Watermelon Man or the Pineapple Man. For me, he was the Pineapple Man, but I stand corrected. He's referred to as the Watermelon Man, but let's not get into that debate, heated debate. But Keith Messer was obviously a significant contributor to sugarcane and dairy farming in the area. It's important to acknowledge that he's got a recognition at the Harvey Bay Historical Museum and Village. They are a significant family to the region. Particularly, as you would know, Cooper's Walk was named after young Cooper who succumbed to a terrible illness and lost his life. That is a really beautiful place of reflection and walking, and we really wanted to capture that as part of the whole area of that Torquay area where families could come, spend some time with their families, and other people could come and just reflect on the importance of community and the importance of family. And I believe that involving the Messer family in the naming of the next section is really important, considering that young Thomas, who is a valued member of this community, also died tragically at the age of 8 to leukaemia. Without going into further details, the motion is simple. It acknowledges the contribution the Messer family has made to Harvey Bay's development and growth, the loss of Thomas to leukaemia at the age of 8, the contribution that Keith Messer played to the history of Harvey Bay, particularly as he was known by many as the Watermelon Man, and also work with the Messer family in naming the new section of the Torquay Boardwalk in recognition of the above. That's the motion, and I seek council support.
Okay. Councillor Everard. The moved by Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Everard. Those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. Item 12.1, regarding the Fraser Coast Aquatic Centre fees, 343 to 344.
Mr Mayor, that was also a matter that I put up as a question on notice, and there is a recommendation. It does miss part of the recommendation. I would be seeking an amendment. It was in budget discussions and also in the final email that I forwarded to the Office of CEO that I understood was agreed on. There was a section in the pool hire fees that referred to hire of one lane and does not include the entry of pool, and it was non-for-profit slash, it said not-for-profit slash community, I believe, but I can check on that. I didn't write it in my notes. The addition to that, and that I saw it as, and I understood was accepted, was that another word would be added into that, being medical. And the rationale behind that was that people, particularly in relation to work or people with disabilities that do work rehabilitation, and they've certainly made their views known in relation to the frustration or the difficulty it is of paying the $10 lane hire, the entry into the pool, and also then having to charge their client for the hour that they use it. There's a reduction in that hire, and it was modelled in the first instance, so I understand that we did turn our mind to it, and we were aware of the appetite to change that. So I'd be seeking that point B. C would be amendment to pool hire of one lane, $8 entry to include medical. Because there's an $8 and there's a $10 entry. So effectively what we're saying is that businesses pay the $10, but if you are a not-for-profit, a community group or a medical, that you get it for that $8, and that would be the motion that I'd be moving. I'd have to...
Just on that, the proof of medical, how's that?
Well, if they are a physiotherapist, if they are a occupational therapist, it's quite clear as far as my speaking to the staff, and when they've approached us, they understand who uses it for medical purposes. So that would be people in relation to rehabilitation or return to work. So those occupational therapists and those medical therapists that come to use the pools.
Okay, yeah. So it's so is that clear now?
Yeah, sorry, if I could just, the actual wording is hire of one lane, so it's actually not, it's not for school slash not for profit, so it would be amended to school slash not for profit slash medical. So it wasn't community, so it was so under pool hire it reads hire of one lane, does not include entry pool, and it would be school / not for profit / medical.
CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not quite sure. I'm confident the staff understand it and understand the interpretation of that amendment.
I can indicate that there was an email stream before the previous budget where you met with staff and you came back with me in an email. I can provide that to you saying that you had modelled it. It just simply, I believe it was just a typo that had been missed out as far as the suite of things. So I'm happy to...
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's entirely up to the council to determine whether their position on this. I very much averse to making amendments to policy without considering the whole policy and the amendments incorporated in that policy, so councillors can reflect on what the purpose of the policy, the outcomes the policy was going to achieve, and what the amendments bring in effect. I would prefer to see the policy brought back with those amendments for consideration, but that's a matter for council to determine. And
can I indicate that that occurred? It was simply missed out in the adoption of the budget. And as CEO, you actually participated in a workshop, and that was actually, and you indicated by email that that would be changed, but it just simply, it was a typo that was not added. As simple as that. So it's not. It's all those issues have been modelled and considered.
We have got a study going on, haven't we, into the aquatics overall scene. So, anyway. So when do we look forward to receiving that study? Any idea?
Yes, Mr Mayor, we do have the OGM Consulting Group very close to finalising their report on the review of the aquatic centres, and that includes pricing structures and management models. So that report will be coming to offices very soon, and we'll bring it to councillors for consideration as soon as we can. And these issues will also be addressed in there, but we can certainly live with this in the interim. I understand.
Seconder for that? Councillor Seymour?
Well, I just want to second it, but I'm going to be proposing an amendment. So can I do that as a seconder? As long as the mover agrees?
Yes.
And then I'll withdraw my seconder if it doesn't. Further, G, companion card holder or carer / support worker for a person with a disability or health condition / no charge. So that is combining two of the existing, that's combining two of the existing lines and amending them. And that came up in public consultation this morning, that there's a lack of awareness about companion cards and their eligibility. So the companion card, which is it all right if I speak to this amendment, if you're happy with it? Yeah. So the companion card allows people who with support workers and carers to access entry for free because they're there supporting somebody. So we accept that, like at the Braga, the Fraser Coast Show, and a lot of businesses. Unfortunately, not a whole lot in Harvey Bay, but across Queensland. It's a state government initiative, not Centrelink. And I think we should reflect the sentiment of that, whether people have it or not, that when they have a carer or support worker who is doing a job, who is there to support them to be active and engaged in the community, that their entry is free. As it is existingly, if you have a companion card, but unfortunately not everybody's gone through the system to get a companion card.
So just confirm, it's actually articulating what's already the policy of council, but it's just putting it there so staff are aware of it.
Yeah, there would be some people who would now be eligible who wouldn't be eligible for a companion card just because it requires like a lifelong disability, or so this would be implementing the intent, if not the substance of what's there already.
So that includes it?
So we need councillors to agree to that amendment.
I accept that, and also point out that point C doesn't need to include the words not-for-profit because it's already in the actual, it's already in the fees and charges. It's simply just to include medical.
It is the motion now, so there's no formal amendment.
Okay. So moved by Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Seymour. Anyone against it? No. Go to the vote. Those in favour? Against? Carried. Unanimous. 3. We go into general business before we go into confidential. Councillor Seymour.
Yeah, I've just been contacted by a number of residents in the Pogo Street area of Urangan about the extraction of water from Muller Creek. So I'd like to ask a question to the Director of Community. I'm sure it'll need to be taken on notice given it's now about whether or not a permit has been issued as per the local law for the extraction of water from a waterway or water course. Because as I understand it, we amended local law some time ago in relation to lakes at least, that such a permit would require a vote of council. So I'm seeking information. I'm happy for it to be taken on notice whether a permit has been issued and if one is required for the extraction of water from Muller Creek. Yeah, have you taken on notice? Yep. Muller Creek, it's a development boundary.
Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I'd just like to let everyone know here that Mel Chard, very well known and respected member of the community, in particular the Barham community, passed away last week after a very short illness. I'm not sure what the protocol is, but I would like to put forward some sort of a motion that we as a council recognise his hard work and commitment to the area and send our condolences.
It's a condolence motion.
A condolence motion.
Would you consider maybe doing a condolence motion for both Mel Chard and Warren Purcell?
Yep.
Yeah.
Actually, we'll have them as two separate motions. That's probably appropriate.
Mel's funeral is being conducted at 2:30 this Friday at the community centre in Howard. It's good that we can be there if we can be there, and he was certainly involved in every and those of us that to do with him as a state member.
Second.
Carried. Okay.
Really need to do them separately now.
Sorry.
Oh, well, because we broke
We're going to do Warren's. Yeah, sorry. Is there anything else, Councillor Hanson?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to also move a condolence motion for my person. No explanation. He was a champion of the community, a very giving person. I think all of us had a lot to do with him over many years. He in fact gave one of my sons his very first job there. Internally grateful, and he was a man that used to give back to so many organisations, and he did it without the limelight. He just did it in the background. So happy to move that as well.
Mm-hmm. Speak on. Yeah. Seconder, Councillor Everard. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and after those two really sad things, we haven't voted.
Sorry. Those in favour? Against, carried. Unanimous. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. After those couple of sad things, and they are really sad things for the community, but it happens in life. I'm just glad to report that the Sustainable Farming Conference is still in full swing in Maryborough. Getting glowing reports back from that. We was there yesterday, as yourself were as well, and people coming up to us, congratulating us and congratulating the council. This has really put the Fraser Coast on the map as far as farming goes and primary production goes. We have people there from throughout Australia, every state in Australia as well as New Zealand. So it's a great way of promoting our region. Every time Dr. Arden Anderson walks back and forth, he walks in front of the Fraser Coast Regional Council sign and the Maryborough sign. So it's great exposure. I'm grateful to council for supporting that. I'm going to push again for more workshops next year. But it's just a really great initiative.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
I have no general business.
Councillor Everard. Councillor Chapman.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to let the councillors know that yourself, Councillor Light, and myself, and delegation went to China last week. Sister city with Lashan for 19 years, and it was highlighted to us that the Chinese and around the Lashan area are very interested in what we've got here. With all the stalls at the Tourism Bureau, the people that are operating the stalls had the most people come up. China was the first one that a lot of people went to, and then they come to Australia or Fraser Coast. And but it was just a trip that it was just full on. You're out of bed early in the morning. You just did not stop the whole time. We went to a tannery business, and they buy 100% of hides from Australia. And this place is one of their businesses is on 400 acres. Is across the river on a bridge. Was there industrial it was just how they actually do things over there. But biggest thing I think that we've got to look at is our tourism industry. And commerce with us and take some people from the tourism so we're going to have a briefing, a delegation briefing. I think it's next week, isn't it? I think there's good money to be made out of China, because the wealthy people in China are looking at trying to get out and have a look around the country, and if we can get our flights organised and everything to get them here, every time they come here, all they can talk about is the whales, the blue sky, the clear waters, and Fraser Island, and everything's here. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to I'm very sincerely sorry, and I'd just like to ask for council consideration, accept my apology, but in relation to the item that relates in Churchill Streets for that grant, I do know a family that live in that area, and they did help me in my election campaign but didn't contribute financially, so I just want noted as a perceived conflict of interest, if that's okay. Yep.
Yep. Okay.
I'm so sorry, guys. Yep. And that's it.
Thank you. Councillor Truscott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing I just wanted to check on or ask perhaps either a question or notice is regarding the Wide Bay Motor Complex. I understand they've got a development application approval or being processed at the moment. I thought it was coming to council hopefully by this meeting, but so I guess perhaps if not this one, if there's some sort of ability to find out when it may be coming to council. So I understand that the group is under time constraints with funding as well, and not to mention that we still have an outstanding item from the 1st of December last year as well. So I think it's important to note that that is on the books, and I think we need to address this issue as soon as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of matters. First of all, to mention that the Riders Festival Lines in the Sand was held since our last meeting, and I think generally considered to be a great success. My thanks in particular to the library staff and volunteers who did to get that. It was also a good example of cooperation with organisations such as University of Sunshine Coast and our sponsors such as Mary Ryan's. There'll be a debriefing meeting tomorrow and we'll have more information to bring to council later on. Secondly, in case you haven't driven down Main Street anymore, the building which is affectionately known as the Stegbar building is getting some treatment on its northern side with local artist Akos Uhas, who's been commissioned to paint some street artwork on the side of the building, which really makes it stand out. I'm sure you all know that some of the classic paintings there include Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and Vermeer's...
Sorry, can you just pronounce that again? I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the Ladies of Avignon, yeah, which is an example of cubism. Johann Vermeer's The Girl with a Pearl Earring, and Van Gogh's Starry Night, among other bits and pieces. We expect that space will be activated very, very shortly. There's a great string of bookings already in place to use that for what will be a pretty highly visible workshop space for the local art community. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Could I just say, the artist is aware that building's not going to be there forever?
Well, I didn't deal with him directly because that would have been an operational matter, but I'm assuming that he's been told that. Yes, I mean, obviously the staff know that that's a temporary arrangement, and I don't have the details how much he's being paid, or what copyright payments he had to make to reproduce these classic
Who
pieces.
owns the sheets of iron on it?
Look, that doesn't appear to feature so far as I can see, but I'm sure with our assistance, they'll be there.
Thank you. Councillor Madden.
Sorry. Just wish to thank Councillor Seymour and the staff of council that did a really great job with Open House. I had the opportunity of being at the old water treatment plant at Aberdeen Avenue, and Mark Vanner was there for a time, and he did an excellent job in answering questions about equipment that I know nothing about. And the other thing is the Lutheran Church was, I think it was the first time that it formed part of Open House. It's a semi-modern church with fairly unique architecture, but it has glorious acoustics, and I gather that someone made a question about the acoustics, and our minister, who's a highly qualified pianist, gave an impromptu concert, which seemed to go down very well. And in the light of that, he has agreed that if it is to be part of next year, he will do a couple recitals within the church. Well, I haven't asked her, and she has 7 children. We'll just wait and see. But she's an opera singer as well, a highly qualified opera singer. So just something to add to the mix of Open House.
Very good. Mr. Seeger.
No, I don't need
Thank I'd just like to reiterate the Sustainable Forum that was on. I chatted with a farmer from Mackay yesterday who came all the way down with his brother, and they've been growing cane for 50 years. And he said 3 years ago we stepped into the realm of sustainable farming, and the costs are now 30% of what they used to be 3 years ago. So he's absolutely convinced that it is the way to go. It's better for the soil, better, it's a better product finish, the whole thing. And now the yield is also creeping up and on. But he was just one example of definitely where sustainable farming is working. And great, very appreciative. There was also a doctor there from South Australia, and she was saying the same, where there's growing interest within the general farming community that there's a better way to go than the all-chemical way. So it was great. They were all very complimentary of the Brog Theatre, the facilities in Maryborough, where they're all staying. Some of them were staying a couple of extra days, arrived early, stayed late, which is what was all on about, and it was nearly a break even, I think, for council on the whole exercise. So the overflowing into the economy of Maryborough is much appreciated. So thank you. So we'll go into confidential. Yep. Move it, Anne Madden, Councillor Madden, moving into confidential. Seconder, Councillor Hanson. Those in favour? Against? Carried. Unanimous. Thank you. We'll take a 5-minute stretch of the leg.
Can we make it 2 minutes?
10?
I've got UA. Most of the directors have a meeting with a proponent in relation to drones right now, so I'm going to put them hold 5 minutes.
So 2 minutes. 2. Just stretch.
Yeah, we are registered. Oh, yeah, we're registered for that. Yeah, the Volga, yeah, the show, yeah. And the pool at the moment. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, you can use that at the pool right now. Yeah.
Pay the full rate. You've got plenty.